Hello, my dear warriors. They saw you arrive, and they thought they understood. Eternal light, calm, gentle, untouchable. They breathed to each other. This one shines, but shines harmlessly. They mistook your glow for weakness. They believed your aura was only warmth, only peace, only clarity. But eternal light is not fragile. It blinds. It exposes. It sears those who cannot face it. Understand this. Light does not ask permission. Light reveals what shadows tried to hide. And the moment you stepped in, every mask shattered. Their strategies, their secrets, their illusions were dragged into the open. They froze, not because you spoke, but because your presence illuminated what they feared most, their own fragility. But that was only half the truth, because you were never only light. Beneath the glow, beneath the calm, there was the strike. And when it landed, it was not gentle. It was not peaceful. It was the architect of shadow, precise, inevitable, relentless in silence. They had prepared for purity, not paradox. They thought eternal light would forgive them. They thought eternal light would spare them. They thought eternal light would spare them. But you carried duality. You carried both crown and shadow. And that duality is what broke them. One moment, you were their hope. The next, you were their unraveling. Eternal light revealed them, but the architect of shadow erased them. They tried to calculate one side of you, but they could not endure both. That was the strike they never expected, that the glow they mocked would be the same force that dismantled their strategies. They thought light and darkness were separate. You proved they were one, and in that paradox, their undoing was sealed. They thought the glow meant mercy. They thought the halo promised restraint. But your light is an X-ray, not a candle. It doesn't soothe. It reveals. It drags every hidden circuit of their schemes into the open. Outlines the fingerprints they left on people's hearts, and prints the evidence across the walls like daylight confessions. That is why their confidence evaporated the instant you arrived. They were ready to argue with words. They were not ready to be seen without masks. And then came the second edge, the one no prophecy warned them about. You did not raise your voice. You did not lift a hand. You designed. That is what the architect of shadow does. Drafts unraveling with elegant precision. Removes one pin and lets the cathedral of lies fold under its own weight. While they begged for thunder, you redrew the blueprint beneath them. Floors vanished. Support beams turned to smoke. The podium where they lectured became a trapdoor. Understand this. They trained for enemies who act from rage. They were never trained for a presence that exposes and engineers. Eternal light blinds their sentries. The architect maps the exit of their power. They cannot shield against both at once. Cover your eyes, and you trip. Keep them open, and you sear. Every adjustment amplifies the pressure, because your paradox is a closed loop, an engine that feeds on their choices. They ran to the archives. They fed your name into models. They tried to forecast your next move with old math and stale myths. The results came back blank, not failure, silence. The kind of silence that means the board is already solved and their pieces are irrelevant. That is when the breath started. This one is not playing. This one is writing the game, and you kept walking. Hallways turned, rooms narrowed, windows became mirrors. In each reflection, they met the version of themselves they hid from strategy. That encounter was the strike, not an attack from outside, but a blueprint that forced their own weight to break them. It felt like fate, yet it was only physics. Remove the lie, and gravity does the rest. That is why your footsteps sounded like verdicts. That is why even the lights flickered as if obeying plans older than their dynasties. Now the rumor travels faster than their orders. A presence of light that sees all. A mind of shadow that dismantles what it sees. No prayer convinces truth to close its eyes, and no fortress outvotes a design flaw. They are learning too late that purity without power is naive, and power without purity is brittle. You arrived with both. They have no instrument to measure that, no ritual to reverse it, no courage to stand inside it. And so the room freezes again, in every city that thinks itself invincible, as each strategy appears brilliant until the light reads its wiring and the architect removes a single, silent screw. They breathed your name like it was contradictory, like it was impossible for one being to carry both. Eternal light was supposed to belong to saints, to prophets, to those too gentle to unsettle the world. Darkness was supposed to belong to destroyers, architects of unraveling, who moved unseen through ruins. Never had they imagined both crowns resting on the same head. Never had they witnessed glow and shadow moving as one. That was the paradox that froze their genius, the contradiction that broke their confidence. Understand this. Power is rarely feared when it is predictable. They could have endured pure light, because light alone forgives. They could have defended against pure darkness, because darkness alone consumes. But both means no escape. If they ran toward light, it blinded and revealed them. If they ran toward shadow, it dismantled them. Every direction was defeat, every choice unraveling. You didn't strike them with forces, you struck them with inevitability, dressed as paradox. The mystics recorded it in trembling ink. This one shines with mercy but strikes with design. This one heals with presence but dismantles with blueprints. Rulers bent under it without ceremony, realizing that their strategies had no counter. They had prepared for rivalry, not for contradiction. They had trained for blades, not for silence that glowed and shadows that built at once. Soldiers looked at you and realized discipline itself was a fragment of your rhythm. Their stillness was copied from your stillness. Their courage borrowed from your glow. Their unease inherited from your darkness. And so, the paradox became prophecy. They stopped calling you saint. They stopped calling you tyrant. They began calling you law. Eternal light reveals. Architect of darkness dismantles. Together, the cycle cannot be broken. That is why their dread has no language. They cannot confess it without confessing their own unraveling. So they hide it in rituals, in meetings, in calculations that all return to the same unsolvable equation. Your duality crowns you. Your paradox erases them. You did not need to choose sides. You never had to declare light or darkness. You embodied both, and in doing so, you revealed the flaw in every ruler, every soldier, every genius. They were built on halves, and halves shatter when faced with the whole. That is why their breaths trail through every century. The one who arrived like eternal light, but struck like the architect of darkness, cannot be overcome. That is the crown. That is the fear. That is the legend, sealed in silence. The paradox did not remain a breathe. It spread until it hardened into scripture. Entire kingdoms began to rewrite their codes around it. In the halls of power, rulers stopped asking, "What is the plan?" and began asking, "What happens if they arrive?" Because no strategy survives contradiction. No fortress can guard against someone who shines like light and dismantles like shadow. The mystics were the first to surrender. They tore their scrolls apart, realizing their prophecies had accounted for purity or for destruction, but never for both. They inked new words with trembling hands. Beware the dual crown, for mercy will reveal you and design will erase you. That line became doctrine, passed through temples, carried across oceans, engraved into walls of stone. It outlasted kings, forces, empires. The scripture was not about belief, it was about survival. Understand this. Civilizations don't fear noise. They fear unpredictability. Noise can be measured, predicted, avoided. But duality cannot be charted. You are not light one day and darkness the next. You were both, always. That presence bent reality itself. Generals discovered that no plan accounted for you. Economists found their charts unraveled when your name entered the calculation. Priests stopped praying against you and instead began praying for distance, because the closer they were, the quicker light revealed their corruption and darkness dismantled their lies. The people, too, carried the scripture into their lives. They told children bedtime stories about the one who arrived glowing and struck silently. They warned them not to mistake gentleness for fragility, not to mistake mercy for surrender. They repeated the prophecy. Kindness can sear, silence can build. Beware the one who carries both. What was once fear became foundation. They raised entire generations with the scripture etched in their bones. And the rulers who thought themselves clever, they hid their unease in rituals. They held councils in secret, but every council ended in silence. Because even if they didn't name you, every plan felt temporary, every scheme fragile. They lived with the knowledge that their brilliance could be erased not by a force, but by a presence that embodied the impossible. This is why the scripture endured. It wasn't about worship. It wasn't about myth. It was record-keeping, a record of collapse after collapse. Every empire that underestimated duality fractured. Every ruler who mocked paradox broke. Every soldier who doubted silence vanished into irrelevance. And so the scripture became reality. Eternal light reveals. Architect of darkness dismantles. Together, they are inevitability. That inevitability is now written into culture, into law, into bloodlines. You are no longer a story. They are. You are the law they measure themselves against, the contradiction they cannot erase, the scripture they cannot deny. Scripture was never enough. People breathe, people forget, but law endures, and soon your paradox, your presence, your duality hardened into law, etched not on paper, but in the marrow of civilizations. It became the invisible rule shaping councils, shaping forces, shaping lives. Light will reveal, darkness will erase. and nothing they built could escape that law. Understand this. Power is not defined by what it declares. Power is defined by what it forces others to obey in silence. And so kings bent to it without ceremony. They adjusted their crowns not out of loyalty, but out of survival. Their decrees shifted overnight. Their strategies were rewritten with a single unspoken clause: avoid the dual crown, for light will expose us and darkness will dismantle us. They never admitted this law aloud, but every hesitation in their voice, every pause before a signature, every change of command was a confession. Soldiers carried it unconsciously. They drilled with stillness before battle, imitating the silence of eternal light. They advanced cautiously, knowing that unseen design could dismantle them. They feared not what they could see, but what they could not measure. The architect at work, even when they didn't breathe your name. They moved as if your law governed their steps. The mystics, stripped of prophecy, rebuilt their faith around the paradox. They stopped writing predictions and began writing warnings. If light arrives, you will be seen. If darkness follows, you will be undone. These warnings were etched into stone, carved into rituals, sung as chants. What once was fear became foundation. What once was legend became inevitability. And the common people, they absorbed the law into their culture. Parents told their children, do not mistake mercy for fragility. Do not mistake silence for surrender. Traders in markets carried it in negotiation, fearing that hidden greed would be revealed. Families built their homes around the principle, teaching their heirs that strength is not one-sided, that truth wears two crowns. This law spread wider than borders, across oceans. In lands that never saw your face, they still spoke of the paradox, the one who glowed like eternal light, but struck like architect of darkness. It became not just story, but orientation. How they measured morality, how they calculated risk, how they understood power. And rulers who forgot the law, they collapsed faster than all others, because arrogance cannot survive duality. Those who mocked your glow seared under it. Those who dismissed your design fell inside it. Every empire that ignored the law became proof of it. And so the prophecy hardened into something stronger, something final. This is what terrifies them most. That law does not fade. It does not ask for belief. It enforces itself. Eternal light exposes. Architect of darkness dismantles. Together. They rewrite every system. Together. They crown inevitability. Together. They make you more than legend. They make you law itself. Law without inheritance is fragile. But the law of your duality did not stay confined to rulers, forces, or mystics. It seeped deeper, down into families, down into bloodlines, down into the very architecture of how civilizations thought about power. What began as breathed prophecy became everyday instinct. And once instinct is written into generations, it cannot be erased. Understand this. Children are born into frameworks they do not question. They don't ask if gravity exists. They live inside it. And so it became with your duality. Unborn generations inherited it without needing to see you, without needing to hear your name. They felt the weight of the law in silence. They lived under the rhythm of your paradox. Light reveals, darkness erases. That rhythm became culture. Parents repeated it as wisdom. Never assume gentleness means weakness. Never assume patience means surrender. They raised their heirs to fear arrogance, because arrogance was the wound eternal light always revealed. They trained their children to respect silence, because silence was the shadow where the architect dismantled the unprepared. Even before they understood the words, they breathed the rhythm. Rulers shaped their courts differently. They built chambers with mirrors to remind themselves that nothing remained hidden. They employed scribes to record their laws twice, once for light, once for shadow. They confessed in private that their crowns felt lighter when aligned with your law, heavier when resisting it. Their reigns were not defined by ambition, but by avoidance. More avoid the paradox, or collapse under it. Soldiers altered their oaths. Instead of swearing loyalty to thrones, they swore to stillness. They learned to march in silence, not as display, but as survival. They understood that noise betrays weakness and presence crowns inevitability. And while they never wrote your name into their codes, they shaped their discipline around your aura. The common people lived it most purely. In markets, they did not trust merchants who were too loud, too arrogant. They favored those who moved quietly, steadily, carrying patience in their tone. In marriages, they taught their children to value those who carried both gentleness and strength, warning them against those who leaned too far into one without the other. And in stories, they embedded your paradox as moral law. Even mystics, who once trembled at their failed prophecies, found ways to weave your duality into ritual. They lit candles not just for glow, but for the shadows it cast, teaching that both are truth and both must be carried. They abandoned one-sided deities and built altars to paradox itself, bowing to the eternal balance you embodied. Generations passed, and your legend was no longer story. It was heritage. Heritage that governed choices, shaped leaders, trained forces, and defined morality. They no longer remembered the names of those who mocked you. They remembered only their collapse, and that collapse reinforced your law, strengthening it through centuries. This is the seal. Prophecy becomes scripture. Scripture becomes law. Law becomes inheritance. And once it is inheritance, it cannot die. You are no longer legend. They are legend. You are no longer myth. You are foundation. Eternal light crowned you. Architect of darkness enthroned you. And unborn generations now breathe your paradox as reality. Inheritance shaped the past, but prophecy bends the future. Even civilizations not yet born already orbit your paradox. Long before their rulers rise, long before their forces march, they live under the shadow of your law. Eternal light exposes. Architect of darkness dismantles. It is not myth, not story. It is framework. Futures are written with you in mind. Understand this. Prophecy does not predict. It recognizes. It recognizes inevitability. And inevitability does not wait for belief. It governs silently, carving itself into every decision, every culture, every unborn empire. When new kings ascend, they inherit crowns already marked by your duality. They may not speak your name, but their hesitation is confession. Their caution is testimony. Their silence is scripture. Mystics who once trembled in error now build futures on paradox. They do not pray for visions. They accept the law that duality is eternal. They know light without shadow collapses into naivety. They know shadow without light collapses into fragility. And so, they write rituals that balance both, teaching heirs that only those who mirror your paradox survive. Their chants no longer seek prophecy. They seek alignment. Soldiers in training are told a story they cannot escape. Stand steady, for silence carries more weight than noise. Move carefully, for mercy can sear as sharply as storms. Their commanders remind them, arrogance invites exposure. Cruelty invites dismantling. Forces learn discipline not from their own traditions, but from the echo of your presence. They may not realize it, but every pause, every breath, every silence in formation carries the law of your duality. And the common people? They embed the prophecy into culture. They raise their children to respect those who shine and strike, those who carry patience and power. They warn them against those who lean too far to one side, because imbalance collapses when it meets the whole. They weave songs about the one who arrived like eternal light and struck like the architect of darkness. Even in lands where your name is unknown, the myth has outpaced memory. Memory. The irony is sharp. Your enemies thought your power was momentary. They thought your paradox was too strange to last. Yet centuries later, unborn civilizations begin their stories already bent to you. Their first laws echo your law. Their first fears echo your aura. Their first crowns bend under your paradox. You did not just shape the past, you sculpted futures. This is what unsettles them most. That even in absence, you are present. Even in silence, you speak. Even in centuries that have not yet dawned, you rule. Because duality is not a trait. It is not a choice. It is inevitability. And inevitability builds the future, whether they admit it or not. So the prophecy stands, not as prediction, but as architecture. The world belongs to the paradox. Eternal light will reveal. Architect of darkness will dismantle. And unborn ages will bow to both. Civilizations rise. Civilizations fall. Yet every cycle bends back to the same truth. Your paradox has become the axis. Eternal light reveals. Architect of darkness dismantles. Together, they are not opposites. They are orbit. Every throne spins around it. Every law shapes itself against it. Every destiny quietly aligns with it. You are no longer participant. You are the axis around which all things turn. Understand this. Light alone can be resisted. Shadows alone can be hidden from, but both together form inevitability, and inevitability is not battled, it is obeyed. Kings obey it in silence when they retreat from arrogance. Soldiers obey it in hesitation when they train in stillness. Mystics obey it in ritual when they carve your paradox into prophecy. And the people obey it unconsciously, shaping families, cultures, entire futures around the rhythm you left behind. The proof is in their collapse. Every empire that denied your paradox fractured itself in arrogance. They thought mercy was weakness, and light revealed their corruption. They thought cruelty was strength, and darkness dismantled their foundations. They tried to resist both, and resistance was the very thing that sealed their downfall. And so, each collapse was testimony, each failure, another stone laid into the axis you became. The irony is this: you never declared yourself ruler. You never demanded crowns. You never built forces or carved borders. And yet crowns lean toward you. Forces echo your stillness. Borders dissolve under your silence. Presence has become throne. Duality has become law. And law has become axis. Even unborn civilizations already move around it. Before their kings are crowned, their first decrees echo your balance. Before their generals lead, their first drills reflect your silence. Before their mystics speak, their chants already align to your paradox. They may not call you by name. They may not carve your image into stone, but their entire existence bends to what you proved. Eternal light exposes. Architect of darkness dismantles. And together, nothing survives unmeasured. This is why the room of geniuses froze. It was not shock, it was recognition. Recognition that intellect means nothing before inevitability. Recognition that brilliance is fragile before paradox. Recognition that presence does not argue, it governs. That was the moment they understood you were not simply powerful, you were axis. And the axis does not move for kings, it does not move for forces, it does not move for gods. The axis stands eternal, and the world bends instead. So the prophecy is no longer prophecy, it is law. The law is no longer law, it is axis, stands eternal, and the world bends instead. So the prophecy is no longer prophecy, it is law. The law is no longer law, it is axis. And the axis is you, the eternal light that blinds, the architect of darkness that dismantles, the dual crown that reigns beyond thrones. Ages passed, names faded, empires dissolved into sand. Yet the paradox endured. Eternal light, architect of darkness, the two crowns that never cracked, the two truths that never bent. Where others demanded temples, you required none. Where others carved statues, you carved silence. And silence outlives stone. Silence outlives thrones. Silence outlives time. Understand this. Legends fade into myths. Myths decay into stories. Stories collapse into breaths. But inevitability never decays. It does not weaken. It does not blur. It is the center around which all eras turn. And your paradox became inevitability. That is why your presence, long after your footsteps vanished, still governs kings who never saw you, forces who never heard you, generations rising into futures not yet written. They live in your orbit, whether they realize it or not. Every empire that rose believed itself eternal. They built walls taller than the sky, forces larger than nations, economies stronger than steel. Yet each one unraveled. Why? Because arrogance blinds itself to light, and cruelty erodes itself in darkness. They mocked your paradox and became proof of it. Their ruins are now monuments, not to their power, but to your law. And each ruin breathes the same warning. Resist duality, and you dissolve. Mystics call it balance. Scholars call it law. Soldiers call it discipline, but they are all describing the same center. The axis you became. For some, it is caution. For others, it is reverence. For all, it is inescapable, because light will always reveal and shadow will always dismantle. Together, They are eternal. Together. They are throne. Together. They are you. Even time itself bends to this truth. Centuries are measured not by rulers, not by battles, but by collapses that proved your law. Historians speak of ages defined by arrogance revealed, cruelty dismantled. Generations call them warnings, but you know the truth. They are coronations. Every collapse another crown on your head. Every downfall another verse in your scripture. Every silence another testimony to your paradox. And so, eternity no longer asks for explanation. It does not demand belief. It does not argue. It simply obeys the axis. The axis does not move for gods, nor for kings, nor for forces. The axis is center, and everything else spins. That is why they speak of you. That is why they whisper of you. Not because of what you said, but because of what you are. Eternal light that blinds their lies. Architect of darkness that dismantles their thrones. Duality forged into center. Paradox crowned into eternity. You are not legend. You are axis. You are not memory. You are center. And the center does not fade. At first, they called it paradox. Eternal light here. Architect of darkness there. They thought you switched masks, shifting from mercy to collapse, but they misunderstood. You were never two forces. You were one force expressed in dual tones. Light was not separate from shadow. Shadow was not separate from light. They were facets of the same law. And that law was you. That is why their intellect broke. They kept trying to divide what was indivisible. They kept trying to solve what was unsolvable. And every attempt only proved their weakness. Understand this. Greatness is never born from halves. Halves are fragile. Halves collapse when faced with wholeness. And you are wholeness. You are the crown that carries both glow and strike, both mercy and design, both silence and collapse. This is why no strategy survives your presence. Not because you erase it, but because you complete it, showing where it is. Blind, showing where it is weak. Presence itself becomes judgment. That is the final truth. You are not saint, not tyrant, not prophet, not destroyer. You are all and none. Eternal light blinds their arrogance. Architect of darkness dismantles their cruelty. And together you reveal the flaw in every ruler, every soldier, every genius. They were only halves. You were whole. The scripture now admits it. The law now confesses it. Generations now live by it, and eternity crowns it. Your presence is not legend, not myth, not even prophecy. It is axis. It is center. It is crown. That crown is not placed by kings. It is not earned by battles. It is not gifted by gods. It is inevitability itself, and inevitability bends for no one. So the story ends where it began. You came in like eternal light. They saw hope, clarity, purity. But when the strike landed, it carried the architecture of shadow, precision of collapse, inevitability of silence. And that paradox is what sealed their fate. It froze the room of geniuses. It fractured the pride of rulers. It silenced the chants of mystics. It reshaped futures unborn. Now the crown rests where it always belonged, on the head of the one they could not define, the one they could not measure, the one they could not solve. Eternal light, architect of darkness. Not opposites, not contradiction, wholeness, axis, law. And when history closes its books, when empires fade into dust, when even myths dissolve into silence, one truth will remain carved into the marrow of eternity. You came in like eternal light. You struck like the architect of darkness, and the crown was never theirs to begin with.